This is going to take a look at our lovely types of forests that we have throughout the world. Understanding the parts of a forest is pretty important. So the canopy is the top portion. The snag or fallen logs are really important habitats for many small animals and decomposers. They're actually a good location also for hiding and protection that way. The understory is the shaded area kind of below the tallest trees as well. Ecosystem services that are brought on by forests are immense. They offer so many, like the prevention of erosion with root systems, habitats for organisms, carbon sequestering, and in return oxygen as photosynthesis is occurring. They are recreational beauty, as well as medicine producing. You can have food sources through hunting and gathering of various materials as well, like lumber and paper, a lot of other things. Because forests store carbon dioxide and absorb pollutants, cutting and burning trees actually releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which contributes to global climate change. If you take a look at this picture, they have even more ecosystem services that are around for you. So, unfortunately, we aren't taking care of them. Deforestation occurs, and that has detrimental results on our ecosystem services. Erosion will start to continue and won't stop. We have a loss in biodiversity when the habitat goes away and an extinction of species might occur. Additionally, we have an increase in temperature. If you get rid of the shaded trees, the temperature in the soils and the streams is actually going to increase. And that will have a great effect on organisms that can't tolerate temperature changes. Groundwater is also going to decrease as more water is going to run off and not be trapped by the tree roots and make it underground. So again, this is cutting down trees. These guys, the old growth forests or primary forests, are the ones that have never experienced that. There's not many of them around. They have never been logged, and they have great biodiversity with crucial habitats for organisms like the spotted owl, for instance. There's a lot of controversy between loggers that want to log the protected, that area, and the individuals who want to protect the spotted owls. So there's been a lot of debates with that. But again, there are a few of these forests due to deforestation. So the few old growth forests that we have, people are wanting to protect quite a bit. Old growth forests, again, are the ones in green. We don't have many. It took us a long time to realize what we had going for us. Remember when the first settlers came here, we just tore down all the forests. And it wasn't until around, several hundreds of years later that we said, wow, we should probably be protecting this stuff. And by that time, only the forests out west were really pristine. We see a lot more deforestation occurring in developing countries. The Amazon rainforest, for instance, if you take a look, like the rainforest areas are the ones that are seen the most. Basically, this is due to the fact that the number of trees that can be harvested for product is high in these locations, and these countries need it. They need the economic development, so they're willing to sell the land off to cut down the trees. Also, they're clearing for agriculture. So they do slash and burn, quickly plant some plants for a little while, and then move on. And unfortunately, they've decimated the forest that had previously been there. So how do we mitigate deforestation? Well, we can replant. We can buy recycled materials instead of new materials. We can look for sustainable forestry, and we can try to reuse as much wood and paper products as possible. There's other forest management skills, and this is actually the same one that you saw in previous chapters, where we use maximum sustainable yields. This is the number of trees that can be harvested that's still going to ensure the future resources are going to be around. Because of our fear of timber loss, the national forests were developed, and they managed who uses the land and how they're going to sustainably log that area and use it for recreation. And that's how national forests came about. We were actually like terrified. Oh my God, the forests are starting to go away. How are we going to protect them? And again, like I said before, most of our national forests are out west because we didn't realize the damage we were doing to our country until people started to want to move from the east and settle in the west. And at that point, we started to protect this area. So again, national forests, that's land that's managed sustainably for logging and recreational use. And Gifford that was actually just established by all of this. So there are different types of forests that we actually see when we replant in different areas. We call some of them plantation forests, which is also known as even-aged forests. Basically, these are monocultures, which means they're made up of really only one species of tree. They are all, for the most part, the same age, so it's kind of like the logging company came in, stripped down everything else, and replanted all of these new baby trees all at one time. And essentially, we have little biodiversity in these areas. There's less niches available for other organisms. And we call them tree farms because, again, they're all pretty much the same. So not the best thing to do. We have even-aged forests, and these are less vulnerable to pests and disease because there's a variety of species of plants as well as mixed ages, so they're a little bit more resistant. We see a lot more biodiversity because more animals are around due to the variety of plants that are around. When we go to cut things down, if we cut down everything all at once, we call that clear cutting. Clear cutting is economically advantageous, but and it's actually safe because you're cutting everything down, so there's no fear of like cutting down a tree next to a tree you don't want. It's a quick method. Every tree, regardless if we want it or not, is cut down. Unfortunately, though, it leads to more erosion. It increases the soil and stream temperatures due to the loss of shade and will increase our flooding. So there's other methods out there. We can do tree seed. So here's clear cutting. Everything's gone. Seed tree and shelter systems. That's this one, where they leave just a couple of mature trees around to allow for to drop seeds and kind of repopulate. And there's also something called selection, where we only cut down the trees that we absolutely want and not everything else. This is more dangerous due to the trees having to fall, and you don't want somebody to stand underneath the wrong tree. It's also the best for the environment, but it takes more time and it's a little bit more expensive. Know the National Forest Management Act and the provisions that go along with it. So the provisions are actually just right underneath it here. And basically how they practice sustainability for everybody visiting and logging in a national forest. Let's move on into fires. Forest fires are actually a good thing. Low intensity and frequent fires are good because they prevent mega fires from happening. It clears out the debris, the dead pine needles and leaves and dead trees, and thins the forest a little bit so that only the strongest trees are really left behind. Also, pathogens and insect protection happen because of this. You kind of burn the bugs out, and those go away and don't damage the forest. The pine mountain beetle is actually a huge story that's on the next page right here. It would be a good one to take a look at because that's one nasty insect, and it's been managed through forest fires. So we do things called prescribed burns, and they actually do them in Vernon Hills every once in a while. You'll see them across from the school. And they set the fires, they make sure that they're watching where they're going, and basically this sets a control and does smaller burns to get the little stuff out of the way so big fire doesn't occur and wipe out, half of California. It has been. Also, the cool thing about burns that some seeds actually germinate only after fires. So there's germination that occurs with like sequoia and ponderosa and pine trees that if we didn't have a fire, those seeds wouldn't germinate. So it's actually a good thing for tree populations as well. National parks. National parks are land that is set aside for public to enjoy. There can't be any logging or resource extraction like mining from these parks. They're completely protected. Yellowstone was the first national park that was established, and basically Congress is in charge of designating what's considered a national park. Through the Antiquities Act, the president can actually then designate areas as national monuments, and those are smaller than national parks, and again, they don't require Congress's approval. The president can actually approve those. We have National Wildlife Refuge, which is a place where wildlife is actually protected, so there's no hunting in those locations. Wilderness areas, those are areas that don't have roads or hotels or running water. You can still hike, but everything you bring in has to then be brought out. It's a total don't walk off the path, don't destroy anything, pristine wilderness environment. There are things called land trusts, and land trusts are an area that you would like to establish as a national park, but you can't. So private companies or nonprofits will actually buy the land and create a preserve. And that's cool. The biosphere reserves are managed by the United Nations, so these are international things. They're areas with a ton of biodiversity, and they keep sustainable development practices and preservation practices in one area. So if you take a look, like the core area, people aren't allowed in. Absolutely not. The buffer zone, you might have hiking, but you can't log. And then there's the transitional zone, which more people can actually reside in. Maybe you have more buildings and structures. So they try to make these zones and rings to keep people away from the more important biodiversity in the center. Habitat fragmentation, if you see a picture down here, this was Wisconsin back in the day. And then as people started to settle, they started to establish their farmlands, that's the brown stuff. And this forest now has been fragmented into smaller pieces. And then as, housing developments come up and roads, they fractioned off the forest even more. So that's called habitat fragmentation. And it sounds just what it is. So it occurs more and more when forests are broken apart due to deforestation or agriculture, residential development. It affects species in the areas along the edge because those might differ from species that are like in the actual hardcore forested area. And the last thing is island biogeography. This is a study of the relationships and distribution of organisms on islands. So, due to limited island resources, species will actually shift from a generalist type of species to a specialist. So if you think about the Hawaiian Islands, the birds found on one island are completely different than birds on the other island because the habitat is so different between islands. So they're a specialist species now. They only live in one type of island as opposed to being able to survive on all of the Hawaiian Islands. The farther the island, if you take a look, there's actually rules down here, right in here. The farther the island is away from the mainland, we start to see fewer species that actually make it there. The larger islands have higher immigration rates because they present a larger target for resources and organisms to interact with. Larger islands have more extinction rates because more space allows, they have lower extinction rates because you have more space, which allows for more populations and more niche. So the larger the island, the less the extinction rate. So you can see that in this last picture here. You're going to see more things go extinct on a smaller island as compared to the larger one. National parks are kind of like an island because now we're starting to see national parks surrounded by cities or farms. We call this debate the SLOSS debate.